Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Surface podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us, actually, Professor Güven. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
He's a professor at Earlham College, Indiana, USA, and he's a professor in philosophy, actually. So, as we talked with Professor Farid, today's episode is going to be about culture inheritance and how it does affect our perception, values, and even our point of view, I would say. So, Professor, how do you define culture inheritance generally?
Well, when you posed this question to me a couple of days ago, I started thinking about how I can approach this. And one aspect of it is the question that you later pose is how do we define our identity in terms of our culture? And then I started thinking the cultural inheritance, well, it's kind of a memory. It's a being shaped and determined with our values, with our thoughts, by our immediate surroundings, I would say, because we kind of, if not fetishize, at least a little bit think about culture as if it's a unitary aspect of our existence. And I'm sort of Turkish culture, I would say,
Exactly, yeah.
maybe that's my culture. I don't even know what that actually entails, really. Like, I grew up in Turkey, I came to the United States, and I think about this question a lot, but I think about it as a philosopher as well. So I'm not an anthropologist, I cannot define and understand culture, but I can speak about cultural influence a little bit as a philosopher, if
Exactly,
that's
like
what you
in
prefer.
just in your personal way. I mean, subjectively. That was my question, actually.
Yeah,
So, because as far as I know, you have been living in the US for how long? 10 years?
so 33 years.
33 years. Wow, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how did that, you think, affected your perception about
Well,
philosophy?
yeah, that's a great question. That's the question that I was thinking about. To be honest, me living in the United States is only because of philosophy. So I studied philosophy in Turkey. Well, I studied political science, but then I started studying philosophy in Turkey, and then I wanted to go to Europe, study European philosophy. But it was not financially viable. So I came to the United States, and at that time there were a lot of continental philosophy in the United States, much more than it is now. So I got my PhD here, and I was about to go back home to Turkey, to Istanbul. I just was offered a job, and then I started working. And
Oh, you did your PhD in which area of philosophy? I wanted to ask.
in continental philosophy,
Oh,
it's
okay.
at DePaul University in Chicago, which still has a very strong continental philosophy uh, program.
Hmm.
And I finished that in 1999, and then I
Wow.
was about to leave to come to Turkey. Uh,
Hmm.
but then I got this job in
Exactly.
a liberal arts school in Indiana, and I've been working here since then. Now, the issue with culture, I mean, I first thought of this question when you posed me, why did I even start studying philosophy? And that was really a cultural question for me, because I don't know where you grew up, but if you grow up in Turkey, and I went to an Austrian high school, and we were always told that our culture was a little bit, I don't know how to put this, a little bit, not if not backwards, not as developed as
Hmm.
other cultures. We always had
There
this
was
this
always a comparison with the Western world, I would say generally, especially
yes.
Europe. Yeah.
Yes, and
Hmm.
Turkey, it's sort of within this process of westernization and modernization since, mid 19th century, I would say. So we were just sort of within the tradition of being westernized. Now, it, very early on, I decided that there was something wrong with this kind of cultural comparison, saying some culture is better, more humane, more civilized, etc. But I really couldn't quite understand the whole extent of it. Now, my interest in philosophy really started with my really reaction to Western civilization in general, but Western thought, which was always told us to be superior to us
So
somehow.
that started in high school or when?
Ever since high school, yes.
Oh, okay.
And you also sort of think, oh, we are trying to westernize, which means we are not, but that's a value that we are trying to become. So
Exactly.
that was, you can even sense that as a very young person.
Exactly.
Then I started thinking, well, there's a huge kind of problem with this approach because this is a power relation. And Turkey, if not formally colonized at at least a few years, but sort of mentally colonized in terms of,
Culturally also, I would say. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So then I started thinking, well, if I want to understand this power relation, I need to study the foundation of Western civilization. And to me, uh, whatever Western meant, always traced it back to Western philosophy. So my desire to study philosophy was actually maybe kind of negative. Like I just wanted to understand
Mm.
the power exercised over me, and philosophy conceptualized that power, the power over other parts of the world. So when I started thinking like Greek philosophy, for example, tracing it back to the Greeks,
To
and
the
that's where
ancient times.
philosophy starts, where everything in the West starts. That's the civilization, that's the
Yeah.
way of thinking. And then they want to reinvent themselves. They go back to the Greeks with Renaissance, etc. So that was my initial, actually, it was a very straight question of cultural inheritance, I would say. Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah, it is. Actually, my experience with culture inheritance is a bit different
Okay.
because our listeners might know from previous episodes, my mom is actually Syrian and my dad also half Armenian, half Turkish.
Okay.
So in the household, I mostly grew up between Arabic and Armenian culture, like a mix of both. And in
Okay.
school with my friends, for example, mostly with Turkish friends, of course, especially in high
Mhm.
school. So actually, that kind of affected me a lot when it comes to perception, point of view, and even there's this concept called third culture kid. If you have heard it about before, I don't know. It's a thing that where you grow up in a certain culture. For example, let's say that you are Turkish. You grow up in Turkey, then you move to Germany, for example.
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
had both effects of these both cultures. So when you move to Germany, let's say that religion-wise, so in Turkey people are pretty religious, I would say generally, right? But in
Mhm.
Germany, there's you can find the atheists, the agnostic people, people, Christians, all religions, right? So when you compare this with home, which is Turkey, you start kind of thinking, okay, to which place do I really belong? So
Mm.
actually, I faced the same problem here because I never felt that I belonged to anywhere of this. So I created my own unique kind of culture to myself, which is I take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So at the end, eventually, I got something very special, which is I would call semi-American, semi-Turkish. That's right, because I was really affected by the American media, you know, the movies, Hollywood, books, psychologists also. So that actually affected my point of view a lot. So
Mm.
eventually, as I just mentioned, I created my own unique kind of culture to myself, which is very unique because when someone, for example, asks me, "Where are you from?" I am Turkish actually, but I always kind of hesitate, you know, a little bit because when you say Turkish, they put you in a very strict framework. You know, you're Turkish, so it means that you're religious, blah blah blah. I'm not kind of afraid of judgments or misunderstandings, of course, no, but it kind of puts you in a box, in a very certain box, which is I hate the most thing I hate about this question. So actually, my question for you is can an individual really detach himself or herself from a certain culture?
Well, we grew up at different times, and I think the intensity of the cultural interaction is, I would say, increasing, and it is becoming a little bit more sort of prevalent. So, uh, at, when I was growing up, I was in Turkey. I haven't left Turkey since I was until I was 23. So I just grew up there, and I never really even questioned, you know, the kind of thing like being Turkish. Like, why would I? I don't even know. Like that became an explicit question for me.
Mhm.
because I was just growing up, going to school, studying. We were reading, yes, American media was a little bit more less, but still uh, present.
Exactly.
But then when I came to the United States, that became a very pressing question because then you start questioning
You
your
realized
identity.
actually, exactly.
Yeah. So I am the first recognition that, okay, I'm reading Derrida, I'm reading Levinas to a certain extent. Then I have this recognition, oh, I am the other. I am the other here in a way that maybe I didn't experience that to that extent in Turkey. And there were different cultures, no doubt. But I thought, there were different religions where I grew up in Istanbul. My friends there were Christians, there were Jewish people, so it wasn't just Muslims, even though, yes, you're right, Turkey is predominantly Muslim. And then in the United States, I like confronted this question, but it was always a philosophical question for me, the question of identity. And I pretty quickly realized that this is not just an expression of freedom, the identity. It's actually, as you said, it's a question of being trapped into some kind of perception. And then people are going to understand and treat you and read you and interpret you in a certain way, regardless of what you say. So increasingly, honestly, I felt less and less belonging here, which is a funny trajectory because people come to the United States, the first is culture shock, they say, and then they realize like, oh, I can get used to this, I have a job, I have a family. My experience was the opposite. Like initially it was okay, I was studying philosophy, I was happy, and then I
But you were
was
attached to
understanding.
your culture at the time, right? When you studied in college.
Well, not
Yeah.
really to Turkey, not really. I mean, I
Mhm.
wasn't like I was missing
I
family,
mean,
but I was.
culturally, for example, like values, I would say, lifestyle generally.
Well, I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't very religious, so I studied philosophy.
Hmm.
Uh, I think, I mean, that's hard to gauge at that time. I wasn't. You realize your culture mostly in terms of what doesn't work in another culture. So the kinds of things that I used to do, I couldn't do anymore. And that's the kind of alienation that you feel like you can't
Exactly.
speak to people like that. You can't be forward with people. You have to keep your distance and you can't say certain things because this is not a cultural context in which people talk about these things. So that became increasingly clear to me. And then I was in a professional environment, of course. And then I realized like the more I stay here, the more alienated I became. A concept that Marx introduces into capitalist mode of production.
Exactly.
uh, and it sort of describes the kinds of jobs that we do in the starting in the 19th century with the sort of increase of capitalization and mass production. Uh, this is also a cultural concept, like trying to understand yourself. Now, it's interesting because alienation presupposes that there is something from which you are alienated from, like you have a core identity and you are alienated from.
But
I
is
realize
there?
that's not.
Is there?
No, I
Is
realize
there?
that's not the case. No, not at all. In fact, the
So
first.
you go with the existentialist philosophers, I would say, like Sartre, Nietzsche, a
Well,
little bit.
I
Even
would
Kierkegaard.
say yes. Recently, I'm much more interested in this in terms of psychoanalysis, to be honest,
Oh,
like
okay.
with Freud and Lacan.
Freud, yeah.
Um, the alienation itself starts making you think that there is an identity that you should belong to. And that the feeling of alienation comes from the presupposition or the assumption that you should not be alienated. There should be an authentic relationship to yourself. You
Yeah.
should be authentic self, which I realized not at all. I mean that I don't even know what that means. I don't even
Exactly.
understand that even with myself. So when you endorse alienation, that doesn't mean like you can do anything, everything goes, etc. But you start questioning identity in a different way. So maybe I don't need to belong. And belonging only becomes an issue once you feel you are not belonging. And recently I heard this really interesting, well, I mean, I don't know how interesting it is, but the difference between fitting in and belonging. That
Okay, that's
still,
interesting. Actually, I haven't heard about it before. Could you just
well,
explain it a bit?
I can fit into the United States. I can modify my behavior because I learned how people speak, how people relate to each other,
So
what the
perform,
levels.
you would say.
Exactly. So you can
Uh,
fit in.
yeah.
But you always feel like at the back of your mind that there's something not happening here. There's
Doesn't really
something,
resonate with your personality or the way you take things.
I don't even know whether I would say personality, but it just doesn't resonate. Let's just say it doesn't, I don't belong here. And then
Mm.
I realized this, then I always fantasized about like I belong to Turkey. Like that was kind of the implication of this.
Hmm.
Then I realized that I spent a lot of time in Turkey. I mean, I've been here for 33 years, but I probably spent a lot of time in Turkey as well, all the summers, all the semester breaks, etc.
Exactly.
And not forgotten Turkish, obviously. And then I realized like I don't belong there either. That's not really, I can fit in. I can maybe fit in easily. I don't know about that actually now, but
So
I
is
don't
there a
belong there.
specific place you would say that you belong to? It could be a culture, a country, it could be anything.
Yeah, at this point in my life, I really don't think so because I have been actually very disappointed with the practice of philosophy in the West. So
Hmm.
it became a very, in the United States especially, a kind of career-oriented business.
Abstract a bit.
Well, abstract to the extent that the ideas that you teach or study are not the ideas according to which you live. So we live in a very sort of capitalist, I like to call hellscape in the United States.
So theoretically, they make sense, but when it comes to implications, there's nothing in the reality.
Well, you cannot really live it out. You cannot live out so that's really the fundamental alienation that I have. Now I've been working in this institution for 26 years. I became full professor, but I still don't think that I belong here, which is a very interesting phenomenon, not because I don't like people or etc., but because the model according to which
Hmm.
education and the practice of philosophy and practice of everything else to that matter, but
I
I
see.
value
So is
philosophy.
there a specific philosopher who affected your take on this?
Well, in different ways, intersection of different philosophers, I would say I mostly concentrated on Hegel for a long time, the idea of the dialectic, but
Hmm.
then I worked on Pierre Hadot, who sort of understands philosophy as a way of life, which was actually quite popular during COVID,
Yeah.
that people being into Stoicism and how you can make philosophy a way of life. But quite recently, I'm reading more Lacan and psychoanalysis and trying to understand this
So you're
question
more
of
kind of
alienation.
into the psychology part of philosophy, I would say.
Well, again,
Because
the
it feels,
practice of,
because as I just observed, you're kind of disappointed in real life.
well, to be honest, I also am extremely disappointed with the practice of psychology too,
Oh,
because
okay.
the idea here in the United States, and I believe this as a, psychology as a discipline. I know people who listen to this will hate this, but psychology is a kind of mechanism to make people function in a society that they are not supposed to function. So psychology is also practiced in a way that is similarly disappointing to me in philosophy, namely very sort of performance oriented, clear cut distinctions between what is normal, what is not, and a lot of that becoming sort of pharmaceutical oriented understanding of mental illness and what is the norm, etc. I wrote my dissertation and then my first book on philosophy and madness.
Yeah.
And I was kind of criticizing actually psychology as becoming a sort of disciplinary discipline
Hmm.
to so to me the philosophical aspect of, let's just say, psychology or psychiatry is much more important, much
Hmm.
more um, thoughtful in understanding our existential situation rather than sort of this psychology of like a lot of majors in psychology now, a lot of psychologists, a lot of social workers. We live in a problematic society and trying to fit everybody into that into that society through various means, and I think psychology is one of them. So yes, I'm interested in human existence, human thinking, human soul, but I would hesitate to call it psychology.
I see. So what's the way?
I think it's still philosophical. I think it is, and I don't think that we should actually even name it as such as a discipline,
Mm.
because that makes it much more complicated. Because if somebody says like, "Oh, you are doing psychology, I cannot talk to you," or "You are doing philosophy, I
They kind
cannot."
of label people, you know? Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, and it's very, very prevalent in the United States because that professionalism requires that. So you just perform within the bounds of your
So they
discipline,
kind
and
of put you in a certain box and
so therefore, that's my take on psychology. I mean, this is pretty idiosyncratic. I'm not saying this is necessarily like true, but
mhm.
that's why I study like existential phenomenology, existential philosophy rather than psychology. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember last summer when you came to Istanbul, we were talking about the existentialism in our session. I remember,
Yes,
and
and
you
I'm
had a
sure I said
very
something.
profound. It has actually it still had a very profound impact on me when we're looking at, for example, Sartre, Kierkegaard, and the way how you explained Nietzsche's take also. So how do you connect existentialism to, I would say, the culture inheritance?
Well, that's a really great question because existentialism, as it is currently conceptualized, is a sort of cultural response to certain things in Europe. So when you talk about Sartre, when you talk about post Second World War emergence of existentialism, that's a sort of cultural response to the situation of the world. So to me, and this is always the case in philosophy, there is a conceptual framework, existentialism, and Europe always tries to kind of appropriate that into its own sort of experience.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to think of an experience for people like you and me who don't belong to Europe, don't belong to any particular
We don't belong to
other
anywhere.
country. Exactly. And
Yeah.
how does that manifest itself? So I like some of the takes of Nietzsche, but then his cultural reflections on what it means to be European that I have problems with. So, in a way, that while I'm influenced and think it's important to study existentialism, we really need to understand it from this place of non belonging, the
Exactly.
place of not sort of a particular cultural thing, because philosophy does that, philosophical discourse does that. This sort of like, this is European, this is the foundation of European science, we are developed technology, etc., a rational worldview, etc. I don't think it's working anymore. I don't think that discourse is working in the world anymore.
Yeah.
At my time it worked a lot. It had a
Yeah.
huge impact on me, but I don't think that anybody is like the experience of the people in the world no longer accept this kind of Eurocentric understanding of philosophy. So yeah.
So I see. So as far as I observed, you're focusing mostly on the Western philosophy, right? So what about the Eastern philosophy, like the Taoism, Buddhism, and all these beliefs? How do you think, if you have any like ideas about them, actually, how do you think these kind of beliefs shapes our values? Because as you know, monks and all these kind of people, they go to the mountains, they isolate themselves, they just kind of try to live alone, like individualistic, not in terms of society. So how do
Yes.
you really connect this to the idea of belonging, actually?
Well, that's a really complicated question. I don't
Yeah, it
consider
is.
myself in any way to be an expert or even knowledgeable about non-Western philosophy. I do read some Islamic philosophers because I might feel some kind of affinity to that. But this
Mm-hmm.
cultural appropriation of the Far Eastern religions, I find a little artificial, to be honest. It's sort of like a
In
lifestyle.
what way you mean?
I
What
mean,
aspect?
in this exact same aspect you said, that sounds like individualistic, it becomes a consumable discourse for the Western individual. So, like the situation of yoga in the United States, for example, it's that kind of like an individual well-being and how you deal with the ills of your life and stuff like that. I don't think that there is a sort of real engagement with the thought of non-Western philosophy. But that's putting that aside. Uh, it does push someone to really, what is it that I can contribute to this society or to the world? And they immediately go to their own culture and sort of try to represent it
Exactly.
adequately. And I think that's a philosophical problem to me. Is like, yes, I'm educated in Western philosophy, but I'm not Western. So I have this interesting trip to Turkey
I
in the
see.
summers. I take a bunch of students from the United States to the birthplace of philosophy, which is the birthplace of Greek philosophy, which is actually in Turkey. So
Exactly.
we go to Didim, to Miletus, to Ephesus, to Assos. And what I'm trying to articulate is this problematic nature of origin. We always find an origin to like some cultural origin, some historical origin, but it's always a constructed origin. It is
Exactly.
always constructed after it has happened because Miletus was actually a colony of the Greeks. So, uh, where philosophy is born there, but now they sort of like, okay, this is Greek speaking, this is us. So you always reconstruct that. I don't want to do that with respect to my own sort of authentic self. Like I'm trying to create a kind of authentic cultural, national identity, or even linguistic identity for that
Yeah, I have a
matter.
very interesting question actually. Our last question for you, Professor. How do you think language does really affect our take on culture, I would say, or our perception on life generally?
Yeah, that's a huge question for me because English is actually my third language.
Oh, really?
So after Turkish, started learning German because I went to an Austrian high school.
Okay.
So, but now I realize English is my professional language, the language in which I wrote my books and worked and speak to my children. They speak Turkish a little bit,
Okay, how
not
do you
much.
think your children are affected by this, the language?
That's a
When
whole
when it comes to
different.
belonging, for example?
Yes, I think both of them, I have two daughters, they are both experiencing it in different ways. On the one hand, they cherish the Turkish background, culture, uh, themselves in the United States now. It gives them a certain critical distance to the culture that they are in. And I think that they value that now that they are in college. One of them graduated actually.
Mhm.
But language is really important because sometimes you believe that you are more authentic in your mother tongue,
Exactly.
and that speaks to a kind of alienation. I remember making fun of people when I was in Turkey who were just putting English words into Turkish sentences, and it's like you
Yeah.
cannot speak authentic. I started thinking about that differently now. It's like Turkish is the language that I'm trying to learn now. So I always write in Turkish for myself, and my language became a problem for me, which is good because I have this same problem that I observe the same problem in people in the United States. I correct their English. So
Wow.
then, I mean, I'm a teacher, right? So they write
Exactly.
papers and I have to write like, so then I realized like who really owns the language? What does it even mean to own the language? Because we assume that it is unproblematic. Like I'm born that way and I
You're
speak the
born with
language.
the language. Exactly. Yeah. That's what
E-
they say.
Exactly. And then that became a problem too. So we can say origin, right? My origin is English speaking, Turkish speaking, etc. But then you construct that origin because you don't have that ownership of the language either, because I mean, some of
According
them.
to what? According to who? Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So that like they write sentences that are grammatically incorrect, and then they sort of use words that are wrong. So you can't, just because you are born into a language doesn't mean that you master that language. And I think ultimately everything comes to that desire to master your culture, master your life, master your
Exactly.
language. And once we give that up, that's much better.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I really thank you, Professor Farid Güven, for your time and your valuable insights on cultural inheritance, on everything. Actually, really appreciate you. Thankful actually for you to be with us here today. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really
No
interesting.
pleasure.
When you first asked the question, cultural inheritance, I didn't know how fun and interesting this was going to be for me. So I appreciate it.